Hitler's right-hand man vanished after the war. Nobody knows what happened. Martin Bormann did not attend the Nuremberg trials. He was tried anyway. In October 1946, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg convicted Martin Bormann of war crimes and crimes against humanity and sentenced him to death by hanging. It was the only death sentence in the entire Nuremberg proceedings issued to a man who was not in the room, who was not in the building, who was not, as far as anyone could confirm, even alive. The tribunal noted this. They convicted him anyway. Because the alternative, admitting that one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany had simply disappeared, was not something the world was prepared to accept. For the next 26 years, Martin Bormann was everywhere and nowhere. He was spotted in Argentina, in Chile, in Paraguay, in Egypt, in Spain. Intelligence agencies from 4 different countries opened files on him. Simon Wiesenthal, the most famous Nazi hunter in history, listed him as his highest priority target. The West German government issued an arrest warrant that remained active for decades. There were confirmed sightings, investigated sightings, credible witness testimonies, and photographs that may or may not have been him. None of it led anywhere. And then, in 1972, a construction crew digging near a railway station in West Berlin found 2 skeletons. One of them was Martin Bormann. Except, that is not the end of the story. It is barely the beginning. To understand how Martin Bormann vanished, you first have to understand what Martin Bormann was. Most people, if they know the name at all, think of him as a bureaucrat, a paper pusher, the man who handled Hitler's schedule and signed documents. This is perhaps the most catastrophically wrong impression in the entire history of the Third Reich. By 1943, Martin Bormann was arguably the second most powerful man in Germany. Possibly the most powerful in practical terms, depending on how you count power. He had achieved this through a method so simple and so effective that it is almost difficult to believe. He controlled access to Hitler. Every person who wanted to see Hitler, every general, every minister, every foreign dignitary, every party official went through Bormann. Every document that needed Hitler's signature passed through Bormann's office first. Every order that Hitler gave was transmitted, implemented, and in many cases quietly shaped by Bormann before it reached anyone else. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe and for years Hitler's designated successor, despised Bormann and feared him. Heinrich Himmler, who controlled the SS and the concentration camp system and the entire apparatus of Nazi terror, was wary of Bormann and carefully avoided direct conflict with him. Albert Speer, Hitler's architect and later his armaments minister, described Bormann in his memoirs as the most dangerous man in the Reich precisely because he appeared to be nothing more than a functionary. Bormann had no army, he commanded no military forces, he gave no public speeches, and appeared in almost no propaganda. The German public barely knew who he was, and yet by the final years of the war, he was effectively running the day-to-day operations of the Nazi state, filtering Hitler's reality, controlling the information that reached the Führer, and quietly accumulating power that made even the most feared men in Germany step carefully around him. He had started from almost nothing. Martin Bormann was born in 1900 in Halberstadt, a small city in central Germany. His father was a postal worker. He was not a particularly distinguished student and did not complete his education. He served briefly in the First World War, too late to see combat. After the war, he worked on a farming estate in Mecklenburg, became involved in the violent far-right paramilitary groups that proliferated in the chaos of the Weimar Republic, and in 1924 was convicted as an accessory to murder in connection with the killing of a man his group believed was a French spy and informant. He served 1 year in prison. He joined the Nazi Party in 1927. He was not a charismatic figure. He was not an ideologue in the way Himmler or Goebbels were. He was competent, tireless, and completely without scruple. He worked longer hours than almost anyone around him. He managed money and logistics with a precision that the Nazi Party, chronically disorganized in its early years, desperately needed. He rose steadily, invisibly, through positions that more ambitious men considered beneath them. When Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, flew to Scotland in 1941 on his bizarre solo peace mission and was captured by the British, Bormann inherited his position,
and immediately expanded it beyond anything Hess had held. Within 2 years, he had made himself indispensable in a way that no amount of military rank or public prestige could match. He was in the bunker at the end. Of course he was. April 30th, 1945, the same day Hitler died. Bormann was in the Führer bunker when the gunshot was heard from Hitler's private suite. He was among the small group in the corridor. He witnessed, or was present for, the removal of the bodies and the cremation in the Reich Chancellery garden. He knew it was over. The question that has consumed historians for decades is what he did next, and the answer depends almost entirely on which sources you believe, because the sources contradict each other in ways that have never been resolved. What is agreed is this. On the night of May 1st into May 2nd, 1945, a group of people from the bunker attempted to break out of the Soviet encirclement of central Berlin and escape. The group included Bormann, Hitler's personal physician Ludwig Stumpfegger, the Hitler Youth leader Arthur Axmann, and several others. They moved through the Berlin U-Bahn tunnels, using the underground rail network to avoid Soviet forces on the streets above. At some point, they emerged near the Wiesenthal bridge over the Spree River, one of the last crossing points in central Berlin that was not yet under complete Soviet control. What happened at the bridge is where the accounts fracture.
Arthur Axmann survived. He was captured later, tried, and eventually released. His account of the night of the breakout is one of the primary sources for what happened to Bormann. Axmann said that the group came under fire at or near the Wiesenthal bridge. In the chaos, the group became separated. Axmann said he last saw Bormann and Stumpfegger moving north along the railway tracks near the Lehrte station. He said he attempted to follow them, but was stopped by Soviet soldiers and forced to turn back. Then, he said, he found them. Both men were lying on the railway tracks near the station. Both appeared to be dead. Axmann said he did not stop to examine them closely. He assumed they had been shot. He turned and moved in a different direction. This account was given after the war. It was the foundation of the theory that Bormann had died in Berlin on May 1st to 2nd, 1945. Almost nobody believed it. The reasons for the skepticism were straightforward. Arthur Axmann was a senior Nazi official with every reason to provide a convenient account of Bormann's death. A dead Bormann was a closed case. A Bormann who had successfully escaped was a man who might eventually be found and who, under interrogation, might say things that implicated a great many still alive and trying to rebuild their lives in post-war Germany. Beyond Axmann's testimony, there was no physical evidence, no body, no confirmed identity. The Soviets, who controlled the area where the deaths supposedly occurred, reported finding no remains consistent with Bormann in the immediate aftermath. And then, the sightings began. Simon Wiesenthal was an Austrian Jewish architect who had survived several concentration camps, including Mauthausen. After the war, he dedicated his life to hunting Nazi war criminals. He established the Jewish Documentary Center in Vienna and spent decades tracking, identifying, and helping to bring to justice men who believed they had successfully hidden from history. Wiesenthal considered Bormann his most important case. He received reports of Bormann sightings from across South America throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Argentina in particular. The Perón government in Argentina had been systematically helping Nazi war criminals enter the country through the final years of the war through a network of escape routes known as rat lines, organized partly through sympathetic elements of the Catholic Church, partly through Spanish and Italian fascist networks, and partly through former SS officers who had gone into the business of moving people. Adolf Eichmann had used them, Josef Mengele had used them, Klaus Barbie, the Gestapo chief of Lyon, known as the Butcher of Lyon, had used them. Hundreds of others had used them. Wiesenthal was convinced Bormann had used them too. He collected witness statements from people who claimed to have seen Bormann in Argentina. He investigated financial trails. Bormann had, in the final years of the war, overseen the systematic movement of enormous quantities of looted Nazi wealth into foreign accounts and shell companies in South America and Switzerland, a project so sophisticated and so large in scale that it had its own code name. Wiesenthal believed Bormann had followed the money. The West German government, which had issued an arrest warrant for Bormann in 1961, formally agreed with Wiesenthal's assessment.
The arrest warrant remained. The investigation continued. And then, in 1972, everything changed. And then, nothing changed at all.
In August 1972, construction workers excavating near the Lehrter station in West Berlin, the same area where Axmann claimed he had last seen Bormann, uncovered two skeletons. Forensic examination of one skeleton identified characteristics consistent with Bormann's known physical description. Dental records, compared against charts created from descriptions in wartime documents, were found to be compatible. Glass fragments found embedded in the jaw of the skeleton were identified as consistent with a cyanide capsule of the type carried by senior Nazi officials. The West German government announced that the skeleton was Martin Bormann, that he had died in Berlin on May 1st to 2nd, 1945, near the Lehrter station, from cyanide poisoning, that the case was closed. Simon Wiesenthal did not accept it. He pointed out that the dental identification was based on wartime documents of uncertain reliability. He noted that the physical evidence was consistent with Bormann, but not exclusively so. He argued that the fragments identified as cyanide glass were inconclusive. He maintained that Bormann had escaped and that the skeleton had been planted or misidentified. The debate continued for another 26 years. In 1998, advances in DNA analysis made it possible to test the skeletal remains with a precision that 1972 forensic science could not achieve. DNA was extracted from the skeleton found in 1972. It was compared against a living relative of Martin Bormann, a relative who had agreed to provide a sample specifically for this purpose. The match was confirmed. The skeleton was Martin Bormann. He had died in Berlin on May 1st to 2nd, 1945, almost certainly from cyanide poisoning, within a few hundred meters of where Axmann said he had last seen him. Arthur Axmann, who died in 1996, 2 years before the DNA confirmation, had been telling the truth. The West German government formally closed the case. The arrest warrant was withdrawn. The remains were cremated, and the ashes were scattered in the Baltic Sea in 1999. 54 years after his death. And yet, the DNA confirmation answers the question of where Martin Bormann's body ended up. It does not answer every question about what happened in those final days, and it does not resolve the deeper story that Bormann's life and death represent. Because here is what the clean ending of the DNA test obscures. The rat lines Bormann helped organize hunt hundreds of senior Nazis to safety in South America. The financial networks he had constructed in the final years of the war, the looted wealth, the foreign accounts, the shell companies, were never fully traced or recovered. The men who had worked with him on those networks, the bankers and lawyers and SS officers who had moved that money, largely escaped justice. Some of them were quietly recruited by Western intelligence agencies during the Cold War, their usefulness to new masters outweighing the crimes they had committed for the old ones. The world needed Bormann to be dead. When the skeleton was found in 1972, the case was closed with what many historians now consider an indecent haste. The DNA test in 1998 vindicated that conclusion forensically. But the questions the case raised about what happened to Nazi wealth, about who helped senior officials escape, about which governments looked the other way and why, those questions were never seriously pursued in the years when the people who could have answered them were still alive. Martin Bormann died on a railway track in a burning city in the first hours of May 1945. He got, in one sense, the ending he deserved. Alone, in the dark, in a city that was being destroyed around him, in large part because of decisions he had helped implement and enforce. But the systems he built outlasted him. The money he moved never fully came back. The men he helped were never fully accounted for. He died in Berlin, but in a meaningful sense, he never entirely disappeared.